All right, guys. Well, thanks for stopping by. So the idea behind this is just to give everyone who's tuning in sort of just, we're not looking to replace class guides with this series or anything along those lines. If you're looking for those kind of resources, then the class discords is likely where you're going to wind up wanting to go. But something I've noticed in watching just the Chatterpugs channel and some general other things is that, a lot of the questions that you might ask in a class discord get answered by just sim it. And for someone who doesn't necessarily know how to sim their character, that's not really exactly a helpful answer. So what we're doing here is just kind of going over the details of RaidBots, which is a website that can simulate your character to sort of give you the tools you need to understand some of the more intricate things involving your character. You can also do this using Simulation Craft itself. It's something you have to download off the web, but it's trickier to use, and for someone who's just trying to get some basic information and is not really worried about the minutia of digging into exactly every little detail of the simulation, RaidBots makes things so much easier. So we're going to start with doing a quick sim, actually first I want to start. So the add-on that I'm going to be using to give me the outputs that I'll be putting into the RaidBots website is called Simulation Craft. It's as simple as that. You just go on the Twitch client or Curse UI, wherever you download your add-ons usually, and you install that. So then if you go back in game, what it'll do is if you just type /simc, it'll give you an output that looks exactly like this, that lists your race, your talents, what items you have equipped, any information that's relevant to actually doing the sim on RaidBots. So what I'm going to do is just copy this, and then we are going to go back to RaidBots. Where are you? There we go. And we are going to go with a quick sim to start. So what a quick sim is here for is really just to give you a general idea what your character's DPS should be around. Some things that are important to remember, I'm going to this now, are the simulation options that you can put in to a simulation. Iterations is how many 5-minute fights it will do over and over again when it runs the simulation. So if you put 10,000 iterations, it'll simulate your character fighting for 5 minutes against a patchwork style fight, which is basically you standing still, hitting a dummy for 5 minutes. Number of bosses is how many bosses there are on the fight. So if you're looking to do something along the lines of, say, like a council fight that has, say, what's a good example? Like in Hellfire Citadel, the Hellfire Council. They had 2 bosses active at all times. So if you wanted to try and sim for that, you could sim for 2 bosses. And then fight length is how long you want the fight to be. And then in this case, the default is 5 minutes. And then SimC version is the version of Simulation Craft that's being used to actually run the sims. You don't really ever want to really bother changing that, because if you try and get into too much detail with that, you might wind up using outdated builds of Simulation Craft. And then finally, this one is only going to be relevant as long as we still have Pantheon trinkets. But the option here is that if you're trying to sim yourself in a raid setting and you want to sim based off of however many Pantheon trinkets you have in your raid, you can just add this number. And if everybody in your raid in like a mythic environment, say you have a 20-man team, everybody has a Pantheon trinket equipped, you've got 20 Pantheon trinkets. So moving forward, I'm going to leave all of these settings as default because it generally gives the best baseline for where your character should be and if you should be using a different talent or different gear. The only really big change that you might be curious of is if you're trying to sim around Mythic Plus, which you can do, but you can change that. Beast Lord is the other fight style you might wind up using if you're trying to sim either around Mythic Plus or boss fights with continuous ad spawns. Antoran High Council in the Burning Throne, or in the current raid, is a good example of this, where on a set timer you'll have more ads come in, and that can, so if you're looking to say like, oh, what's the difference in damage on that kind of fight between, to use my shaman as an example, Lightning Rod, which is a very AoE focused talent, or Ascendance, which is a single target talent, you can sort of figure out where you're at with those. But anyway, I'm going to leave that at patchwork. And then, all right, going back. So like I said earlier, there are 2 ways to pull up your character in RaidBots. You just type out the name of your character, and that will pull it up from the armory. So whatever you basically last logged it out as, RaidBots will pull from that and then stick that into RaidBots to be able to use to run a sim. But the way I'm recommending doing it, a faster way, is taking that output that I just showed you from Simulation Craft, this right here, and then you just put that back into RaidBots with a quick paste. All right, and then it's all in there. It's got all the information in there. And then from there, you just go ahead and options all look fine, and you run the quick sim. So I will say, normally, and you can see here, there's a queue for sims if you're using RaidBots. There's usually a good amount of people using this all at the same time, so you'll be put in the queue. For this demonstration, you can be a Patreon supporter to get ahead of the queue. So in order to expedite things a little bit, I have that Patreon stuff enabled. But generally, actually running the sim will take a little longer because you'll put in the queue and you have to wait until yours is up and then it'll run. So here is my sim, just based on what gear I'm currently wearing, what talents I currently have equipped. So basically, what this is telling me is that in a single target fight lasting 5 minutes, and it's important to remember that this is not taking into account movement, which means basically you're hitting a target dummy at your order hall or whatever else for 5 minutes, and it also has, I will get to Crucible stuff in a second, don't worry. You're hitting it for 5 minutes, standing still, and it takes into account bloodlust, augment runes, foods, and elixirs. So it's going to take into account those buffs and the fact that you never move during the simulation. So this is pretty much as perfect a fight as you can get it, and one that is extremely unrealistic to ever actually happen in a raid. What I like to say is that the closer you can get, obviously the closest you can get to your sim DPS, the best, but don't be too hard on yourself. Like 2.3 million DPS on a fight like Garrothi, if I have perfect RNG, I will probably be around there. But on average, I'd say on Mythic in the past couple weeks, I've averaged between 2 and 2.1 million because there is some movement on that fight. I play an Elemental Shaman, so this isn't the case for everybody, but there's a lot of RNG involved in my class and between legendary procs and things like that. So don't be too hard on yourself if you can't get there, but this is a very good metric to measure yourself against if you're hitting a target dummy. Because those aren't fighting back, you're not moving anything, and the closer you can get there, the better an indication that is of your, if you know your rotation and if you're prioritizing things correctly, stuff like that. Okay, so that just about covers Quick Sim. That's probably the simplest, as you can obviously tell, of all the different simulation options that you can do with RaidBots. Next, we're going to go into stat wage, which is something that is a little bit more contentious and something that is useful, but I always say when using these, take it with a grain of salt, because what this does, I'm going to do the same way I simmed my quick sim in for my stat weights. So I just have that character copy from the SimC Addon, paste it in, all good there. Defaults are going to remain the same, and then I'm just going to do generate stat weights. And I'll let this go ahead and go. I'll take a drink of water here. So you can see it's running all the iterations and everything like that. All right, let this go ahead and come back out. All right, cool. So what we have here is your stat weights. And what these can be used with, which is an add-on that became very popular with Legion. The reason for that is, I don't want to get ahead of myself a little bit here, but understanding why stat weights are important and why they're used is good to know. With stats being the way they are in Legion, especially them being so high, it reached a point where, as you can see in this simulation, secondaries overtook primary stats in terms of how much they increased your damage. So it went from most people who understood their class being able to say, oh yeah, generally if it's an item level increase, it's going to be an upgrade for you, to saying, well, it may be an item level increase, but if you're losing a really big amount of crit and not gaining a stat that your character is simming as being more valuable than crit, you might actually lose out on DPS. And just something I wanted to clarify here before I move forward, I should have probably done this in the beginning, but this is only really useful for DPS. I know Fussy's in here. Healers don't really use this, and tanks, not really either. You don't really, obviously, if you want, you can worry about DPS as a tank, especially when you get geared enough where you start wanting to try and min-max, oh, how much damage can I put out while also living through the fight? But raid bots and simming your character isn't as useful in those cases. You still can use it technically with a tank, it's just not going to be as accurate, and there are better guides out there to get you geared as a tank. This is really for DPSers looking to increase their DPS, understand, if I change this piece of gear, what kind of DPS loss or increase can I expect? If I change this talent, what kind of DPS loss or increase can I expect? So going back to stat weights. So you see here this little window. These are the stat weights that I was given based off of the simulation I was run. These stat weights are generated based off, again, the current gear, the gear you're wearing based on the simulation, and the talents you have selected based off your character from the simulation as well. So in my case, crit is the highest, and then haste next, mastery, versatility, and intellect is way at the bottom. So at this point, for me, item level really doesn't make a difference in terms of what I'm looking for in gear. Instead, I'm looking for increases in crit, and then even then, I can sort of eyeball it, but to be absolutely sure about any gear upgrade, you can sim via the gear option on RaidBots as well. We'll be getting at in a few minutes. So what these numbers mean generally is that, so my crit is labeled at 48.89. A 1 point increase in the value of crit on my character, so say I get 10 crit, is going to equal around a 480 DPS increase based off of the math behind this current gear set and talent set. And this is one of the kind of caveats that I know elemental shamans generally, we don't use them as much because we follow a different system behind using stat ratios instead of stat weights. They're still useful, but you have to remember that technically your stat weights can change every time you change a gear piece. So min-maxing it to that extent really isn't necessary. What I do on most of my tunes is I'll sim for stat weights once a week, and then I'll go, and this was when I had time to raid on multiple tunes once a week, but hopefully when the summer comes back around to be able to do that again. So once a week, I'll sim at the beginning of that week, go through a raid week, equip any upgrades that I've gotten, and then resim the next week to know going forward what potential gear might be an upgrade. So that's how to get your stat weights from RaidBots. And next what I'm going to show you real quick is how to use that with Pawn. Pawn is another add-on within WoW that lets you see these stat weights within the game and shows you on the tooltip of an item that you're potentially ready to equip, how much of an upgrade is it? 3%, excuse me, 3%, 5%, whatever. So to use Pawn with this, first all you wind up doing is you just hit copy to clipboard, and that will copy the Pawn string, which you're going to need to import into Pawn in the game. So we'll go back to WoW here, get myself out of AFK, stop the dance control. Okay, so back in the game, just hit C, open up your character menu or whatever else you have hotkeyed to. I never change it from the default being C. And then in my window here, I've got a little Pawn. And remember, guys, that I'm using ElvUI that I've modified a little bit. So just be prepared that the button placement should generally be around the same. But if the Pawn button, in your UI might be here instead of here, that's very possible. But there will be a button on the character pane somewhere. So you go in there. So you have this window open. This is Pawn. You go to weights first, scale first, to make sure that it is not set on automatic. You want Pawn to be set on manual so you can manage the scales that you're using. And then after that, it's pretty simple. You just go to import right here, import, copy and paste that Pawn string that you got from RaidBots, hit OK. So that showing up right there means that it's loaded, and it being highlighted means that it's going to show on the tooltips right over here. And then if you look in this little window, it shows you the same information that was presented in RaidBots. So crit being worth 48.89, haste being worth 45.68, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and after you do that, one thing I do like to do is if you go to scale on these default pawn scales and you go ahead and just check this, it'll remove them from showing on the tooltip, which can save a little bit of confusion. And those pawn default scales are generally not very accurate, especially since each individual character can have different weights. So I generally disable those, have the one. So we're going to take a look here. So based on my weights, this new belt I got this week, worked out, I've got a new piece of gear for us to test with, is, according to Pawn, a 1% upgrade. And that is based on the fact that I have this other belt equipped, and this belt has more haste than the other belt, so Pawn is telling me that it should be an upgrade. And generally, that's always going to be true. However, if you really want to be sure, and in a case like this, where they're so close, a 1%, 2% upgrade is much less clear cut than say something like, oh, like 15%. Like that's pretty much going to be an upgrade in every case, unless for some reason you're dropping a huge amount of your like if it were to tell me it's a 10% upgrade and it had say it was a 985 ring and I have two 960 rings, that's a big item level jump. But if that ring didn't have crit on it, it may not necessarily be an upgrade because losing that much crit may not work out in the long run. But anyway, so that's how you set up the stat weights with Pawn and how you use it in game. And like I mentioned earlier, it's important to remember with these stat weights that technically they can change after you get a gear piece. And this especially comes into play if your class has any breakpoints. The idea being, shamans don't have, I should say, elemental shamans don't really have a breakpoint. At this point in the expansion, we're gearing for just about as much crit as we can get, and then haste, and then mastery, and then versatility. But some classes have stat breakpoints where a stat will be extremely valuable up to a point and then drop off in value after you hit that level. So I'm going to use Frost Mage as an example because I have a Frost Mage alt that I play pretty regularly. And so they have a crit cap or a crit breakpoint of 33%. And that is when you reach the shatter cap. Without going into too much mage detail, I won't really talk about what the shatter cap is. But anyway, so Frost Mages generally want to be getting about as close to 33% crit as they can without going over, and then your weights will change to generally be gearing towards haste or versatility. That is the other thing you have to be careful of, and that is reliant on knowledge of your class. If you know you have a breakpoint, you need to be aware of where you are towards that breakpoint. And if you're really close to it, and you throw in a haste gem and it gets you past your breakpoint, then that's fine. But if you switch everything about your gear towards getting as much of this one stat as you can because RaidBots tells you to do it, you might wind up actually losing DPS because you've gone way beyond that breakpoint and you could be putting those wasted stats into the other areas. Yeah, sort of like old hit and expertise cap and all that, not being able to miss and everything. There are some classes that have some stats that you want to get to a certain point, and then beyond that point, the stat is much less worthwhile. Okay, just wanted to make sure. That's not the case for every class, but that just requires, a little knowledge of your class. And if you're wondering about if those kind of things exist, I encourage you to look at the class discords and class guides that they have available because they'll be able to go into a lot more detail about the minutia behind why your class wants each stat. Like for elemental shamans, we have a passive that called Elemental Fury that makes our crits do more damage than other classes' crits. So we like crit because our crits do more damage than other classes' crits. That's why it's good. Okay, so now that we've gone through that, let's see what I have next on the docket here. I'm just going to pull up my document real quick here. That way it's talent compare. Okay, that's an easy one. All right, this will be fun. All right, back to RaidBots. All righty, go ahead and go back to this. Loads, there we go. Okay, next up is talent compare, which you can just find right here. And then as I go, as you can tell, they also all exist right along the top here. So if you want to go back and forth between gear compare, relic compare, whatever, that's where you go as well. So I'm going to go ahead and delete out everything here. Yeah, I apologize if I talk about Elemental a lot. It's just, it's the class I'm most familiar with. I've only actually been playing it since Nighthold, but I guess it was the class that clicks with me. So I have since gotten to be, well, I'm 11 out of 11, so I guess I'm not half bad. And I just use that as a lot of examples because it's the class I best understand. Anyway, so load that back in. Just, oh, whoops. Would help if I had the right copy on my clipboard. So we'll go back in here, SimC, copy, go back to RaidBots, boom. Okay, so what you'll see down here is your talent row. And what we're going to do here is we are going to compare. Thanks, AirTags. What we're going to do here is compare another talent on the level 100 row that is also as viable generally as Ascendance for single target with Elemental Shaman. Remember that generally in terms of talents, there isn't usually as much variation, and the change usually comes on fight type. The way talents work is there's usually, and this might be changing in BFA with the way they're designing some talents, but I don't want to look too far in the head. In Legion right now, like Elemental single target build is pretty much the same on every talent row for any single target fight besides one and potentially another talent change. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the general single target build, Elemental Blast Echo. Okay, so the simulation, having something pasted in here guarantees that your current talent setup will be simulated, and then any additional talent set you make down here will also be simulated. So I currently have Ascendance equipped. So let me make sure. Yep. Okay, so I have Ascendance on my character right now, and I am going to sim Ice Fury instead. So now that I have that talent selected, I'm good to go. Technically, if you wanted to do another set, so say, that's a good one. So say I wanted to also try and see if Totem Mastery with Ancestral Swiftness instead of Ice Fury is better, or excuse me, Ancestral Swiftness, a lot of S's in that, is better than Aftershock. So in this case, I would also create another talent set that runs Elemental Blast, Echo of the Elements, and Ice Fury. Okay, so same thing here, 10,000 iterations, patchwork, all remains the same. Go ahead and compare talents and see where it goes. Let's say I should get hopefully jump to the queue a little bit. There it goes. Yeah, there's a lot of S's in that. Okay, so what we can see here is that the 3 different talents setups that I simmed for. So the top one here is what I currently have equipped, which is Totem Mastery, Gust of Wind, Earthbind, Aftershock, Elemental, Echo, and Ascendance. And then these 2 other rows here are the other talents setups that I simmed for. The first one being 3-1-1-1-3-3-3, which lines up to Totem Mastery, Gust, Cap Totem, right? Yeah, Cap Totem, Aftershock, Elemental Blast, Echo, and Ice Fury. And if you're wondering and you've never seen talents set up like that as a number, that correlates to your talent window in game. So 3 being that one, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you get it. So if you ever see in a guide or anything, someone says your talent setup should be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, whatever, that is what they're talking about. The first, the second, and the third option in your talent tree from left to right. So based off this, switching to Ancestral Swiftness is a downgrade for me because it's the lowest of the 3, and using Ice Fury for me is also the lowest of the 3. So generally, in a single target situation, if I want to be doing, yes, AirTags is right. Some guides will also label them as that. Generally, in a single target situation, I will be using Ascendance most of the time. And that can change with Elemental, at least, depending on how stats are. Ice Fury could wind up being better, but I'm not going to try to go too much into Elemental. Apologize for that. So anyway, that is generally how you use a talent sim. So if you want to, you can also see, it can tell you the relative difference. So you see switching between Ascendance and Ice Fury is only actually a 1.1% loss. So it's really not a big deal. And then switching to Ancestral Swiftness is a pretty big loss. So here you go, just some little additional information if you want RaidBots to tell it to you. Okay, so that is talent comparisons. Let's see what we've got left on the list. I believe it's just the Netherlight and Gear, which are the two longer ones. So, Gear compare. Yeah. All right, Asa. I guess if you've seen any questions that you think need answering, this is probably a good time because these last two take a little bit longer to explain. So this is probably a good time for a little mid-lecture break.
I really haven't seen many questions. I've seen a couple people kind of answering them as we go.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, Aerotax is he's a member of my guild. That's probably why he's jumping in to answer the occasional question. So if you think we're good, we can keep going.
Yeah, I say go for it.
Alrighty, in that case, we will go ahead and get started with the next one. So these last two are a little bit more complicated, a little bit more in depth, but are really the nitty gritty of why you want to use RaidBots and why people will tell you to sim stuff for your character. So the first one we're going to do is gear compare. So if you've ever gotten a piece of gear and wondered if it's an upgrade or not, this is the tool that you can use to help tell you that. So doing the same thing that we did previously, rid of this, SimC, grab the character string, grab that, and that string has all the gear I have equipped. And if you've, just a quick, because I know I've been doing this without really explaining why I've been doing it. If you have information filled in this section from a previous sim, if you clear it out like I've been doing and then just copy it back in again, RaidBots will load it up again. Sometimes you have to, for whatever reason, it doesn't reload your character from sim to sim if you do different sims. So I found the easiest and quickest thing to do is just repaste that in there after clearing it out. Okay, so in the example that I'm going to be using, I actually got a new belt from Raid this week. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the information from this belt. So the information you're going to need about any item that you're simming for is the name of the item level of the item, and if there are any enchants or sockets on it. So in my case, I got the Depraved Tactician's Waistguard. It's out of Antor's High Command. It has a socket on it, and it's item level 960, and that socket has a 200 crit gem. So on RaidBots, what you do is you've got a little thing here. You can name the gear set if you want to kind of identify the different gear sets you're testing. If you've got a whole bunch of different gear sets you're doing at once. So I'm just going to name this new belt. So the item I want is Depraved. That also requires spelling it right. Got that right. So it is at item level 960. And it does have a socket. So I'm going to put that it has a 200 crit gem. And since that is the only item I'm going to be comparing against my currently equipped gear, technically that's all I need to do. I could run the sim and go, but I'm going to expand a little bit more to sort of show what else can be done with this. So you can add more than one item. You can sim however many items you'd like. So if you have a whole bunch of upgrades that you just got at once, or you're trying to set up like, oh, if I have 4-piece, but I just got a different piece of, I just got a different tier piece, and I want to see which 4 pieces are best on my character. You can use these multiple items to kind of test different gear sets. So that's one of the things that you can additionally do. And then so I'm using that. So if say I got a third belt for whatever reason, and I wanted to test that one as well, I could add, what's a good example? It's another item that I love. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So let's do Chain of the Unmaker. Okay, so this is, I actually have this neck equipped, but it is at a higher item level than what this one is. But this gives you an idea of what something with an enchant will look like. So it's a necklace, 940 Island, we're not worried about that. If it has a gem, you put in the gem, and since it can be enchanted, you tell RaidBots what enchant you want on it. So in my case, I would have Claw. And then you're good to go with the neck enchant. The last thing I want to mention, because there's a legendary that you have to be careful of when doing these gear compares. And these gear comparisons are good for seeing which legendaries are best. Generally, that's another thing that is more clear-cut. There are some examples where multiple legendaries can be good depending on where your stats line up. But an example I like to give is Frost Mage. The Frost Bracers are almost always going to be the best legendary you can equip. I don't know of a single situation, except maybe really heavy packs of Mythic Plus, but even then you'd probably just run that Safuz. But I don't know any Frost mages who run high Mythic Plus. But anyway, I don't want to talk too much about Mage because it's just I'm not going to claim that I know too much about Mage. But anyway, those bracers, for example, I can guarantee are almost always going to be equipped. So in that case, if you get them and a class guide says, oh yeah, these bracers are far and away the best legendary you can have, don't worry about even bothering simming with it. It's going to be your biggest DPS increase. There you go. There you have your answer as to whether you want to equip them or not. But sometimes it's not always as clear cut, and legendary, this kind of simulation is good for figuring that out. All right, so we are going to go ahead and simulate my new belt. I'll leave the necklace simulation here, even though I know it's going to be a downgrade. But bad. Okay. So same thing. We're going to leave the simulation options as default, and then I'm going to go ahead and just hit compare items. And again, reminder, you can see the queue number starting to rise. At peak hours, that can reach, I've actually seen it in the 200s, but I'm able to skip. You will, unless you also become a Patreon supporter, you will not be. So just be aware of that. So anyway, all right. So based off this simulation, I thought it would be something close, but I wasn't expecting it to be this close. The new belt I got this last raid is actually a 0.1 DPS increase compared to my old belt. So in that case, I would equip it. So we'll go ahead and throw that on. Good to know I got an upgrade out of raid this week. All right. So, and that's generally what you're looking for out of your sims when you're comparing gear, is will these new pieces of gear, quite obviously, increase your DPS? So you see here, I simmed at 2.29 for what I currently have equipped, and then for my new belt, I had about an increase of about 2,000. It does work with trinkets, Tim. I can go back and show real quick. So I will go ahead and just copy and paste this out real quick. Yeah, I can do it with trinkets. Oh. There we go. So show up my trinkets here. So say the trinket I have never managed to get through the entire V expansion, even though it's really good for elemental. Let's go ahead and sim myself an Arcano Crystal, because that thing never drops. Arcano. Okay, so say I got a, oh, and this is actually a good thing to bring up, so I'm glad you mentioned this, Tim. Say it's at a 910 item level. So when you're simming a trinket or a ring, since there can be two, you have to indicate which slot you want to put the trinket into. So in my case, if I'm trying to see if my Acrid injector is better or this Arcano Crystal is better, I need to put it in socket 2 so that they compare against each other. And if you just want to double check, you just look at the picture and see like, all right, this is the second trinket here, this is the second trinket here, it'll be comparing these. So it's as simple as that for trinkets. So we'll go ahead and simulate that. Same thing, the queue's getting a little higher now, but I can skip. All right, thank goodness, my Acrid finally beats an Arcano Crystal. That's good to know. So there you have it. If I were to have a 910 Arcano Crystal in my second trinket slot, I would be losing DPS. And man, does that feel good, because Lord knows I've never seen that trinket. So there you go. That's as simple as a trinket. And there is one other thing I want to go over, because I had mentioned earlier a legendary that can change things up a little bit. If you go back to Gear Compare, if you have the legendaries that give you a talent, that being Soul of the Farseer, Soul of the Archmage, Soul of the Slayer, make sure when you are running the simulation, you do not have the talent equipped that that ring will give you. So in this case, for Elemental, the talent ring gives me Echo of the Elements. Get it out of my bags here. I'm gonna have to put on a different legendary to. Okay, there we go. So amongst all these ridiculous legend, here we go. So mine gives me Echo. So when I equip this, it'll automatically give me Echo of the Elements. Great, super good talent. If I don't pick a separate talent to sim with, I can guarantee you equipping that ring will always be a DPS decrease, because one of the biggest reasons these rings can be good is because they allow you to use the second talent of the row. So in my case, in almost all, in the main situation I use this ring is in Mythic Plus. So in that case, usually what I'll wind up doing is I'll go into the Mythic Plus with Liquid Magma Totem equipped because it's an AoE talent. And then when I get to a single target fight, I'll throw on this ring because it gives me Echo and it gives me some more single target damage. So in this case, what we're going to do is I am just going to take off the ring again. Single target set back on. So you'll see here I have these talents set now. Instead of having Echo equipped, I have Liquid Magma Totem equipped. So I'm going to re-grab my character string. That, and then paste that back in. So that will be using my currently selected talents. So then if I want to, say, simulate for the ring, instead of using my legendary boots, what ring? Hydra Scales, okay. Hydra Scale. There we go. So these are at a 965 item level, no socket. So that replaced my legendary boots right there. And then you add an item, and then I do Soul of the Far. And then that'll replace the first ring I have, and then, give it, it's got 200, or not 200, 200 crit. 200. So there you go. So another built-in functionality of RaidBots is it'll warn you if you're trying to simulate with more than one legendary or two legendaries equipped. So if you see the little yellow box come up that says like, oh, you have more than two legendaries equipped, just know that, yeah, you can't equip more than two legendaries, so you're not going to want to sim with more than two legendaries. So here we go. And then I will go ahead and run this sim. There you go. Now the queue is up to 130. So there you go. So that will look at, this is my currently equipped gear right up here, my current talent set. And then if I switch to using these boots and put on the legendary ring, which gives me Echo of the Elements, that's the kind of DPS loss I can expect. So it's just something to remember. It's kind of a niche case, I know. And in some cases, it might be that, what's a good example? Marksmanship Hunter uses the talent ring single target in raid situations pretty much exclusively. You can use a couple other legendaries, but that's one of the better ones along with the boots. So in that case, it might be one of those things you just kind of set it or forget it. You only equip it out when you don't need, gives you lock and load. So when you don't need that talent. But it's just something to remember, because if you're trying to sim different legendaries and see what's best, and you accidentally leave the talent equipped that the class ring is giving you, then you're going to wind up simming much lower than you actually would be if you had your talent set up right. So I just wanted to make that clear so that people don't accidentally sim something and don't have the right talents equipped when they do it, and they wonder why my soul ring isn't giving me as much DPS as I thought, and there you go, that's why. Yeah, so, all right, the last one, and I hate the like Crucible, but here we go. This is such a great system that Blizz added, and it's really just super fun to work with. Okay, so the Netherlight Crucible is a great time when you're trying to sim, because once they introduced it, it added a layer of RNG to your relics even. So what we're going to do is, I also happen to get I got out of a cache a new relic. So what we are going to do is go ahead and sim to see if that relic is an upgrade for me. So we're going to go ahead and copy this, paste this back in. That'll give me, there we go. Okay, so it'll load up. This right here is what I currently have as my relics. So take a quick sip here. This is what I currently have in my weapon as of right now, two 965s and 970. That's what I'm using. So if I want to look and see at this new relic, it's going to require me to hit duplicate. So that will quite literally duplicate what you currently are using in your weapon in a second row. And then this is much, it'd be more annoying to do in one screen, but you get to see the whole process. And that's what. Okay, so this relic has, let's see, it's got Shocklight, Shadowbind, Lava Imbued, Molten Blast. Okay, so I can tell you right away just from class knowledge that, and everybody probably would tell, a healing increase is not going to increase my damage. So I'm not going to worry about running this iteration, being that Shadowbind and Protection of the Elements is not going to be a DPS increase. So I'm not going to worry about that one. But what I am going to do is I'm going to run 4 different sets to see which of these 4 different iterations might be a DPS increase. So that'll be if I pick Shadowbind and Lava Imbued, if I pick Shocklight and Lava Imbued, and if I pick Shocklight and Molten Blast. And I will say here, this is another thing. Class knowledge can come into play as well. Like if I had to put my money, I'm going to say Shocklight and Lava Imbued is probably going to be the top simming option, just because I know the crit buff is really good for Shaman, and Lava Imbued is one of our best traits. But if you're lacking that specific class knowledge and you just want to know, oh, which one should I use, then this is exactly what this is for. So we go ahead and start working on putting this in the sim. Oh, and the other thing to mention is that since I have 2 Storm Relics, technically I can sim those in either slot. So if I wanted to see if, and of course it's the same relic, so I apologize that it's the same name, but there's only so much I could do to control what relics I get in raid. So in this case, I can tell you right off the bat, because elemental destabilization is elemental's best trait. I'm not going to bother simming that because I know it's a DPS downgrade to move away from any relic with elemental destabilization, unless it's a huge item level loss. And since it's also 960, replacing a 960 relic with another 960 relic that has an inferior trait is just, it's a no-brainer. So what we are going to do is sim this 965 one, because even though it's technically a higher item level, because this other new trait has some better traits on it than Firestorm, which is just flame shock damage, it has the potential to be an upgrade. So what we're going to do is I am going to set this to the level at which the relic I'm simming for is. So it's a 960 relic. The first one I'm going to be doing is Shadowbind and Lava Imbued. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And then make sure this is checked. This is just the first row of the NLC that gives you the plus 5 item level on your weapon. Just make sure it's checked so it simulates having that. So we're going to look at Lava Imbued. Okay. So now we got it set up to sim with a 960 relic of Neuroshock Electrode with Shadowbind and Lava Imbued. I'm going to duplicate that. And then I can do the same thing. So let's see, we got Shocklight and Lava Imbued. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to Shocklight. And then I'm going to duplicate it one more time. And then we're going to do the same sort of simulation with Shocklight and Molten Blast. So between all of those, let me get the right thing up here, and then Shocklight Lava Imbued, and then Shocklight and Molten Blast. There you are. All right. So those are all the different relic combinations I'm going to be simming for. And now y'all understand why min-maxing with the NLC can be such a pain in the neck, because I'm having to sim so many different options. But if you're looking to min-max, this is generally the way to go. Oh, this got duplicated. Same. Fuck yeah. So let's see. So we got what I have currently equipped, the new relic with Shadowbind and Lava Imbued, the new relic with Shocklight and Lava Imbued, and the new relic with Shocklight and Molten Blast. So those are the relics I'll be simming for. And let's see what we get. Same options as always. We'll go ahead and pull up chat. Okay, pull it on up. And I'll be curious about this one because I'm actually not sure if it'll be an upgrade or not. Okay, it looks like, oh, it is. Nice. Okay. So let's see here. Neuroshock Electrode. Oh, no, it's not. I apologize. I had to reread that for a second there. So this is what you currently have equipped. And you'll see here that Neuroshock, the new one, just barely pulls ahead of it in that case. But this 2246, what are you doing? 2246, 153, 152. Okay. Yep. Okay. So this is right. So this is what I currently have equipped. This is a baseline, and then these are the other iterations I ran. I apologize for misspeaking. This window can be a little confusing when you just kind of glance at it and you don't take a minute to look at it. So as I expected, the slight item level difference did make it up, and what I currently have equipped is still the best for me. So that, in a general sense, is how you sim for Netherlight Crucible stuff. Is you have to go through each iteration of, well, if you want this relic choice, you want to put it in this socket, and you have this trait attributed to it in this tier 2 trait. That's sort of the general idea. So you'll see down here where I picked, so I was simming for this one, Shadowbind and Lava Imbued is the worst of the ones here, and then what I currently have, which is Neuroshock and Firestorm, is the best. I'm honestly not sure why they make what you currently have equipped and your character name separate, but that's the way RaidBot puts it out. So just general rule, be careful when you're reading this output and make sure you take your time in understanding it. But that is the general gist of doing stuff with the Netherlight Crucible. And I believe, I'm not going to get into advanced gear compare, top gear. So top gear isn't something I actually use very often, so I'm not really going to get far into it. Basically what it does is it looks through your bags and will help pick the best item for you if you go through these different options and everything. I had, yeah, the 1% increase. I have never used this function once, and I honestly, as long as you have a little bit of class knowledge and can use the gear compare function just fine, I don't think you'll ever need to. But there are other guides that you can look out there if you want to see how to use the top gear function. When we put this up in its written form and have the VOD attached to it, I'll try and find one of those guides and attach it to it in case you're really interested. So I believe that it just about covers everything. We've gone through pretty much every aspect of simming involving RaidBots. And then, so I saw one question come up just a little earlier ago that I wanted to mention involving RaidBots. If you go by your armory, so say I go back to a quick sim here, let me clear this out. So, put my name in. Let that load up. Okay, so this little guy right here. Crucible data is up to date. It's important to remember that the WoW Armory doesn't actually track the individual Crucible traits that you have equipped in your weapon. So the first time you run a simulation with RaidBots, if you want it to be accurate, you are going to have to at least do the option that I've been doing with SimC and copying and pasting this string once, because that string contains your Netherlight Crucible information. And then, so the first time you run that run a simulation with RaidBots, you're going to want to use that information so RaidBots can store what Netherlight Crucible traits you have equipped and what weapon traits you have equipped in general. And then anytime you get a new, why is the name of it blanking on me? A new relic for your weapon, you're going to want to redo that so that RaidBots has an up-to-date storage of what your Crucible traits are. Because if you don't, it'll either tell you it doesn't have the information at all if you've never done that, or your Crucible data is out of date. So make sure you do that the first time you ever try and use RaidBots. I think you were having that trouble earlier. So install SimC, /SimC once, copy and paste into the window so that RaidBots has your Netherlight Crucible information, and then you're good to go. Just use the armory from there. But if you could do the SimC thing once, you can do it again. And I think that's a heck of a lot easier than having to rely on the armory, especially if you're trying to compare multiple gear sets or talent stuff or anything like that. So yeah, I think that just about covers everything. So I will, anything, talent compare, do you want me to go over that again real quick?
No, I mean, I just think this person might have joined after you went over that section.
Okay, yeah, I can go over talents again real quick. So let's see here. All right, so here's talent compare real quick, Chris. So what so what it's doing is that it will look at your currently equipped talents. So your currently equipped talents are right up here. And then any talent set that you want to compare against it, you just pick out here. So say instead of, if I want to know what's better, Ascendance or Ice Fury. So I'll just look at Earth Grab, Aftershock, Element. So that's the talent set that it will simulate for you, and it'll simulate it against what you currently have equipped. And if you want to do more than one, there you go. You can do as many as you'd like. But I mentioned this before, and in case you're coming in late, talents are generally a little bit less variable than gear or stat weights or Netherlight Crucible stuff. You can usually find the best talents for different fight situations by looking at a class guide. So again, to harp on Elemental, I apologize, but again, best class I know. Single target raid fights, I'm almost always running Gamble, which is Totem Mastery, Gust of Wind, Earth Grab, or Lightning Surge Totem, it doesn't really matter. Aftershock, Elemental Blast, Echo, and Ascendance. Technically, Ice Fury can pull ahead in some situations, but currently the way I'm simming, it doesn't. And then for, say, an AoE situation, so Portal Keeper is a perfect example, like the best elemental fight in Taurus. Instead of running Ice Fury and Echo, I would instead be running Lightning Rod and Liquid Magma Totem. And you can go between after. Anyway, talent knowledge, it's good to sim it. If you think there might be a better talent for you that works, like with Elemental, for an example, in some cases, Storm Elemental actually pulls ahead of Echo, and you have to sim to know that. But in a general sort of sense, and that's sort of where we're trying to align this sort of stuff, is that if you really want to get in the nitty gritty and you're curious about, oh, is there a talent that could potentially pull ahead in the right gearing situation, that's where you can go to the class discords, because they can discuss, oh yeah, let me see your sim. Okay, it looks like it might be a little bit better, but this is why. This guide is meant to show you how to do this in the first place and sort of the reasoning behind what they do, because whenever you get the question, you ask a question in Discord, is this gear better, or what's the best trinket in this situation? And most class cards will tell you to sim it, and if you didn't know how to do that, it can be a problem. So anyway, that is just about everything. So I think I have covered just about anything. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Mac, do you think I just got about everything?
I think so.
Okay. All right. With that, Azo, unless you have any objections, I guess I will go ahead and I can't believe I'm about to say this on a stream, but we'll go ahead and dismiss class. We'll call it there.